Hello,
Hello.
I'm Yervan Zorian. I'm the chairman of AGBU Silicon Valley and very proud to host this particular episode of the Distinguished Executives Dialogue. This is part of our Armenian Virtual Bridge accelerator program, an accelerator program that we started several months ago, providing training, education, mentorship of 15 startups from Armenia. Those startups and their founders are with us today, in addition to our audience at large. These episodes of dialogue are with distinguished executives from the Silicon Valley industry, typically. Today, we have a very seasoned, very particular guest with us. I'm happy to introduce him in a moment. We'll have several people who will be joining us soon also. This Virtual Bridge Accelerator program has been organized for several months now, as I mentioned. It is based on sponsorship by the High-Tech Industry Ministry of Armenia, the organization of the HBU Silicon Valley, and the hosting of the entire program by the HBU Armenian Virtual College. Unfortunately, the startup founders were not able to come to Silicon Valley physically to participate in the accelerator program, but fortunately, we were able to do all of that in a virtual manner. Besides the founders, the executive teams of those startups were able to participate through the platform of AVC, the Armenian Virtual College. So I'd like to thank all three parties in this case for their contribution to the accelerator program. Meanwhile, I'd like to introduce our special guest today. Dr. Rafic Makki is a well-known executive in Silicon Valley. He has a very distinguished profession, if you want, because he covered various aspects, various domains. He started after getting his PhD in the US. He was in academia for a while in Northern Carolina, being a professor, doing innovative work in technology, very impressive work during his academic era. Then he moved to the Gulf area in the Emirates. Particularly, he worked in Abu Dhabi, serving the education from the government side of it. He was a fundamental person in the education ministry. He revamped the education program there, as I remember, and produced a very, very interesting end-to-end from school to university education program, for particularly in Abu Dhabi. And since then, he went into the investment firm. He represented Mubadala in Global Foundries in the industry. He served on the executive team of Global Foundries, very dynamic company. And part of Mubadala, he joined the Silicon Valley team here for several years now. So I'd like to start with our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Rafic Makki.
Thank you very much, Yervan. Thanks for inviting me to this forum. It's great to be with you. I know we were going to do this earlier, but postponed.
Yeah.
2021 is great, better than 2020.
Yes.
I want to share my screen. Can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Can everybody see?
Yes, we can see it.
Presentation mode. All right. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Yervan asked me to talk about how we view innovation in science and technology and its impact in our world. And so I thought I would partition the discussion into three sections. First, I think I'm hearing some.
We are good.
We are good? Okay, I thought I was hearing some. My presentation is divided into three sections. First, I'm going to talk about how science and technology have impacted our world in general. Second, our view of the megatrends and underlying technologies that are shaping our future. And the third part of the discussion is how I believe startups can be successful in a world of intense competition. Right? What are the main things that you need to consider as you're thinking of developing a startup, or you're having a startup and you're building your startup. And what you see here in front of you is not just uh, a title slide, but also a slide that shows you the GDP over time, the world GDP over time. So you see here, can you see my pointer? So you see here, starting with year 1000 all the way up to the present time, and you see some inflection points along the way. So world GDP was pretty much constant for 1,000 years. Actually, I can go back to year zero and you'd see the same thing. But a couple of inflection points. And when did these inflection points happen? When do you think they happened? They happened during intense innovation in science and technology. This is the first industrial revolution here, and the second industrial revolution there. And these innovations in science and technology don't just happen all of a sudden. They come along and they last for 50 years or more. And so you can think of innovations as seismic shifts that last decades. And you can think of these seismic shifts as waves, and we've had four of them thus far since the 19th century. So the first wave had to do with the steam engine and machines and productivity. The second wave had to do with mass transport and communications. And of course, the impact on world GDP has been tremendous. The third wave is a digital information age. And the fourth wave is the wave we are going through now. And who knows how long it will last. And that's the knowledge and autonomy age. And if you do the same thing, you look at these waves in time, and you look at the same time frames, you see similar waves in medicine, So vaccination, initially actually in the late 18th century, vaccination, 1796 was the first vaccine. But vaccinations, anesthesia, germ theory all happened during the first wave. The second wave, we had X-rays, antibiotics, more vaccines. And then we go to the third wave with using recombinant DNA in medicine. For example, in the 1970s, as early as the 1970s, we were using recombinant DNA to produce insulin. And you know what? How many lives insulin has saved over the decades since. To the current wave that we're experiencing, and that's the intersection, the marriage between technology and biology, a field known as digital biology. And what is this all meant to the world? What it meant to the world is that science and technology are acting as the great equalizers. Not just, when you think about science technology as a great equalizer, you think, okay, people have access to information no matter where you are in the world. So it's equalizing there. But it's also equalizing in the pocketbook. And so if you look at the 1820s, it was a world in poverty. Moving to 1970, more and more of the world became richer and richer. And then moving to 2000, a much richer world in general. So you see here the curves, and we're plotting here income per world citizen against millions of people under this income. So the red curve is the 1820s. So most people were here. Most people in the world were here. Moving to the 1970s, it improved. And now in 2000, it didn't just shift to the right, but it also went up, right? So this is what science and technology does. It's the great equalizer in many respects. And it's the great equalizer too in terms of medicine. We are all living longer. So if you go back to Americas in the 1850s, the average life expectancy was 43. It's 78. It's 78 today. And this increase in life expectancy happened all over the world. So we're a richer world. Of course, there are a lot more things to fix. We still have a great divide in income, but science and technology is moving everybody forward. All right, two areas changing our world today: digital biology, functional genomics, and bio-inspired systems. So let's take a look at this. In terms of digital biology, the main thing that happened that made, I think, made it possible where we are today, producing vaccines in under a year, for example, is that the cost of DNA sequencing have come down so much that actually, if you look at the decrease in cost of DNA sequencing over time since the year 2000, it really dwarfed Moore's law, right? So Moore's law, we double the amount of transistors every couple of years, and we reduce the cost per transistor. The DNA sequencing cost went down by a factor of 8 yearly from the year 2000. In fact, if you look at this, it cost $2.7 billion in almost 13 years to sequence the human genome. $2.7 billion and 13 years to sequence the human genome. But by 2003, we had sequenced the human genome. And if you go to 2004, 2005, 2006, the cost of DNA sequencing was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Today, it's less than $1,000. Less than $1,000. Where in fact, just 15 years ago, it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. All right. And what you can do with that has been amazing to the world. So gene editing and the impact of gene editing, the idea that we can edit genes, we could understand what they do, and if a certain gene does harm, we can actually change it. T cell augmentation. T cell is part of your adaptive immune system. We have the ability today to take your T cells out, modify them so that they can specifically attack a certain kind of disease, for example, leukemia, cancer of the blood. Many forms of leukemia are curable today. Why are they curable today? Because of our ability to augment T cells. We can take T cells out, we can equip them with a lot more firepower, direct them at so that they can be directed at the cancer. So we take them out, we equip them, and we multiply them. So we have millions and millions, and we re-inject them into the body. And science is now curing most forms of leukemia as a consequence. Unbelievable to think about just 10 or 15 years ago. Cell regeneration. Right? Cells have a way of communicating with each other, and they receive signals. And one of the signals that cells receive, for example, has to do with cell death. And cell death is important because cells reproduce, regenerate. If they don't die, they become senescent or they become cancerous. So today we are understanding more and more how this happens. There's a protein called P53 that tells a cell at a specific time, okay, now it's ready for you to die. If it doesn't happen at the right time, then that could cause disease. So our ability to understand how cells communicate and signal, how they talk to each other, we can even take cells and send the right signals so that they can regenerate. For example, if you have liver disease, right? Scientists now are working on medicine that targets the cell signaling itself and sends a signal to the cells to regenerate the liver. So if you have liver disease like liver cirrhosis, this approach would regenerate the entire liver. We're not there yet, but it's possible. And sooner than later, I think we'll be there within the next 10 years. Using DNA to store data through a process called DNA synthesis for producing the DNA. So digital biology, there's no question in my mind. No question in my mind. Digital biology, together with bio-inspired systems, are the pillars of disruptive technology of the 21st century. And talking about bio-inspired systems, the idea of designing computing systems that mimic biosystems, for example, neuromorphic systems, circuits that mimic the function of the brain, right? And the brain is an absolute marvel in terms of energy efficiency. 10 to the 16 flops per second, resulting in an astounding 0.24 femtojoules per flop, right? Cytomorphic design, designing circuitry and systems and computing systems that mimic what happens inside our cell. And if you think the brain is impressive, the cell itself, individual cell, is a factory of proteins. And the way it does it, the way it communicates with other cells is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I believe we'll probably get to cytomorphic design before neuromorphic, because there's a lot that we don't understand about the brain yet. It's still, we know a lot, but there's a lot more that we don't understand. It's still a mystery to us. So neuromorphic design, cytomorphic design, I see those as developing over the next 5 to 10 years. And machine learning, as you know, is also a bio-inspired type of approach to computing. And it's helping solve some of our biggest engineering and science challenges. From high temperature fusion. High temperature fusion, if we get to high temperature fusion, if we can do this efficiently, that will solve all our energy problems. The challenge with high temperature fusion is that it occurs at least 100 million degrees centigrade. 100 million degrees centigrade. Some go to 150 million degrees centigrade. And with those kind of temperatures, maintaining stability of the system, controlling all the turbulence that happens inside the fusion reactor is the biggest challenge, right? And AI is being utilized today to model this turbulence, to model the plasma turbulence dynamics, just like we model storms and changes in the weather. The same kind of machine learning technologies are being used to model the turbulence, so we can design systems to better control and contain this turbulence. Of course, machine learning is being used in DNA synthesis and protein design. You may have heard recently that Google's AlphaFold 2 was able to predict protein structure from its amino acid sequence with great accuracy. This is the holy grail of medicine, understanding how amino acid sequences become proteins, and proteins are three-dimensional structures. Our ability to predict how an amino acid sequence becomes a protein, and what does that protein, what will that protein do? This is the holy grail of medicine. And AlphaFold 2, a machine learning program, is now able to predict with 85% accuracy. Right? The goal is to be above 95% accuracy, and maybe this will be achievable over the next few years. In DNA synthesis, machine learning is being used to look at the relationship between a particular sequence that you want to develop and a protein function that you target. It can also be utilized to improve yield of the DNA synthesis process. And very importantly, now we have RNA vaccines. You want to know that this RNA vaccine was actually manufactured at Moderna or Pfizer, and not somewhere else. So security of DNA, security of related RNA is very, very important. And machine learning is helping to identify the lab of origin by looking at certain patterns that are used in that particular lab to produce the DNA or the RNA. It's helping in quantum computing Machine learning is being used to control and optimize qubits. As you may know, the big challenge in quantum computing is how to control the qubits, how to reduce error rates, and machine learning is being utilized there. And the fifth and final one is in autonomy, right? Self-driving cars as an example, and machine learning is all over this, right? From sensor fusion and making sense of all the sensors in the automobile, and understanding what the sensors are saying. It's all over this. So how do we at the Mubadala Capital Ventures look at technology, and what is our technology strategy going forward? Let me start with this. This is a key point. We believe that if you look at the greatest innovations over the past 75 years, they didn't just happen suddenly. They happened through deliberate and purposeful and with purposeful intent, right? And they last, just like the innovations I talked about earlier, they last decades, right? And so when we talk about disruptive innovation, people might think, okay, disruptive innovation, it just happens as suddenly and changes everything, right? Most disruptive innovation doesn't happen like that, actually. Most disruptive innovation happen through deliberate and purposeful intent, and over years and years. It just, we don't see it. That's the issue. So look at mobility, for example. Look at mobility, right? So mobility is all around us today. But Yervant and I were using pocket calculators in the 1970s, and a few years later we were using Walkman, right? That's an example of mobility. Now, in the 80s we had cell phones, and in the 90s we connected cell phones to the internet. So if you are a producer of cell phones in the 90s that are connected to the internet by the mid and late 90s, why were you disrupted? Why was your business disrupted with smart mobility? Why couldn't you see it coming, right? If you're producing Walkmans, that's mobility. Why were you disrupted by smart mobility? You just didn't see it coming, but the signs were there, the signals were there. So a lot of times, not in every case, but certainly in most of the cases that we look at over the past 75 years, companies were disrupted because they didn't see the signals. That's why they were disrupted, right? But the signals were there, right? This innovation didn't happen overnight, right? It was years and years and years in the making. So from the atomic age to the race to space age, to personal computing, to digital revolution, all the way to smart mobility, disruptive innovation comes in waves. It takes a while to get there. There's a lot of signals along the way. And then when it happens, still companies are disrupted because they don't see the signals. All right, so how do we view the mega trends of our time? I see 4 mega trends that are changing our world. First one is electrification. The second one is personalization. The third is robotization, and the fourth is convergence. Right? And these, I will talk on the next slide more about these 4 trends. The point I want to make on this slide is the enabling technologies that are making all this possible. Right? And if you are an entrepreneur, you could be working down here. You could be working in the enabling technologies, or you could be working up here, utilizing these enabling technologies to solve problems in one of these four areas. So what are these enabling technologies? There's 3 major categories. You empower, you connect, you compute, right? So whatever you do, you have to provide energy to it, right? You need to do some computation on it, and then you need to communicate the results. So these are the 3 general areas. Under empower, I believe energy harvesting is going to play a bigger and bigger role. We've been talking about IoT for more than 10 years now, and still waiting for it to happen on a large scale. It will happen at some point in time, and energy harvesting will be a big part of why it will happen in a large scale. Because without energy harvesting, if you have sensors in the billions and each one has a battery and you have to go and change the batteries or recharge the batteries, it's not feasible. It's just not feasible, right? We need a way to harvest energy efficiently. And so you talk about also batteries in this domain, talk about new types of materials, you talk about new types of sensors. On the compute side, of course, machine learning, AI. So the goal to reach general AI is a very important one. Today, machine learning is, even though it's helped verticals, just about every vertical of the economy that you can think about, we're still not there in terms of causality. So you can teach a machine learning program that there's a relationship between the sun rising and the rooster singing in the morning, but understanding what causes what is still not there, right? Is it the rooster making the sun go up, or the sun going up making the so this causality is an important goal. So we are looking for new types of machine learning, including real-time machine learning that has causality as an important element of it. Data science, quantum computing, of course, is very important. And on the connect side, massive distributed, multi-input, multi-output towers and antennas. Security is key there. And so let's look at the 4 megatrends. So electrification. I believe that electrification will accelerate. You may have heard GM recently announced that within 15 years, they will begin to produce EVs only. I think by 2035 is the announcement that they will only produce EVs. And you're going to see a lot more regulations in terms of requiring electric vehicles. I see that coming. I see that coming in aviation as well. Some form of hybrid engines. So one of the areas that we look at intensely today is technology that will bring about electrification. So transportation, building sector, and the industrial sector. On the personalization side, this COVID changed a lot of the way we do business and affected our lives deeply. And personalization technology has become a very important part of it. And if you look at, if you study all the news that coming out related to COVID, it could be a long time before we get rid of this thing. We're going to be living with it for a
Rafi, we lost your voice. You're not on mute, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now, yes, yeah, now we can. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry. Robotization and convergence. One example is, I talked about it earlier, is the marriage between technology and biology and everything that's coming out of it. The transition from a static world to a world with dynamic living systems. Brain-machine interfaces, I would put them in that category as well. Sometimes we think, oh, this is so far-fetched, it will never happen, right? But brain-machine interfaces are here. They're not practical yet, but there's no question in my mind they will be practical. All right, so how do we look at all this in terms of the investments that we make? We look at this as the intersection of two areas. One are the technology forces that I've been talking about, and then the business models that we are experiencing today. So if you look at the intersection between the novel business models and the technology forces, these are the areas I believe that are important in terms of investments. And these are the areas that will move the needle the most. So from business models, online to offline services, access over ownership, machine learning and robot as a service, and all this driven by data, all this driven by data, right? So data as a service is becoming extremely important. Why is Tesla so great? Tesla is great, and there's nobody like Tesla in terms of autonomy in my mind, because they have the most and by far amount of autonomy data that anybody has. Nobody has autonomy data as much as Tesla. And I think that's why it's very difficult for anybody to compete with them, at least in that part of the sector, the autonomy part. On the EV part, technology is there, battery technology is there. We want it to be, of course, improved so that batteries will last longer. You can drive further. But I think on the autonomy side is where Tesla has the biggest advantage by far, and it's the data. You look at healthcare, right? Data is very important in healthcare. So if you want to do clinical trials, for example, if you want to do machine learning on data, and data that you cannot access because of privacy concerns, how can you do machine learning on data that you cannot access? Well, you use federated learning techniques. So data, I believe, is at the heart and center of technology going forward. And if you're a startup, think about data. Think about what you can do in that area. Technology forces, real-time machine learning, quantum computing, biology-inspired systems, as we talked about, neuromorphic designs, cytomorphic designs, energy harvesting, and so on. So if I take this circle, intersect with this circle, now I look at things like hybrid cloud architecture, security and applications, machine learning in healthcare, and accelerated drug discovery, artificial intelligence and autonomy and smart logistics, and convergence of technologies. And the COVID-19 pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, is accelerating all of this, right? And online to offline services has really skyrocketed, so much so. There was a 10-month period last year where Amazon was hiring 1,400 employees every day. Imagine that, 1,400 employees every day, right? And if you look at the medium we're on now, video, in 2020, it consumed about 1.9 zettabytes of internet traffic, right? In 2020, we had an extra 200 billion hours of video calls or movie viewing. 200 billion extra, right? And you think of this as a standalone technology. It's not a standalone technology. There's major infrastructure behind the medium we are on, from the communications industry to the data centers industry and everything underneath them. There are major technological infrastructures behind what we're using today. So if you look at just the stock market, for example, we have lost millions and millions of jobs since COVID pandemic started. Millions and millions of jobs. But look at the stock market, still doing well. Why is it doing well? Technology is doing well, right? Because technology is making it tolerable for us, right? So what technology has meant, I mean, there's really no words to describe the importance of technology in our life. And one thing is crystal clear. Our need to capture, analyze, communicate, and store data has been grown exponentially. And COVID is accelerating that even more. And there was a committee that was put together about a couple of years ago to look at the impact of all of this in terms of our hunger for data, our ability to keep meeting the needs. And last year, it was accelerated by COVID. But the original committee started to meet 2 years ago, and they were concerned about two major seismic shifts in technology, and whether or not we can address these seismic shifts in the technology, whether or not we will have the appropriate foundational technology in terms of integrated circuits and systems, computing, and communication that will address these challenges. One seismic shift is related to energy, and the second one is related to data. This committee is now known as the Decadal Planning Committee for Semiconductor Technologies, and it published its first report in 2020. It's available online. You can go to the SRC website, or you can just Google Decadal Plan to get more information about it. On the energy side, the world energy production looks like this, and these are the projections if current trends remain. Okay, so this yellow line is the world energy production. Right? The energy consumed by ICT, total global energy consumed by ICT, looks like this. And if trends stay the same, it's going to keep going up. And by around 2040, it's going to be close to the world energy production. This, folks, is a seismic shift. Why is it seismic shift? We can't have this green curve meet the yellow curve. It's just consuming a bigger and bigger portion of world energy production. And that's based on the way our current integrated circuits, our current computing and communication systems work. We have to find new types of computing architectures to address this that would consume much less energy. And the target of this decadal plan is a 1,000,000x improvement in energy efficiency. I'll leave it there, and I'll invite you to download the report to get more data on it. On the data deluge side, data is eating the world. You know, we used to say software is eating the world. Now we say data is eating the world. So 45 trillion sensors estimated by 2032. All these sensors are capturing data and communicating data. We must find new ways to utilize this data, to learn from it, and establish insight from the data. And one thing we can look towards is how we humans process data, right? If you look at this figure here, our eyes receive information at a rate of 8.75 megabits per second, right? But our brain doesn't process information at that rate. Our brain processes information at 100 bits per second. So what's the difference there? The difference is that our brain is capturing the most essential parts of this 8.75 megabits per second information. It's not capturing all of it. It doesn't need to capture all of it. It's capturing the most relevant, important parts of it. Right? So our brain is doing data compression, and it's doing data compression at the rate of 10 to the 5 to 1. Right? So with all these trillions of sensors predicted by 2032, producing all data, can we use the same type of technology that our brain utilizes to reduce the amount of data that we actually use for our computation? And so one of the grand goals of the Decadal Plan is to come up with compression techniques with a compression or reduction ratio of 10 to the 5 to 1. Today here we are at the beginning of the exaflop range. By the time we get to this year, we should be heading to the zetaflop regime. But we have no technologies. Let me say that again. We have no technologies that will do this, right? So using the von Neumann architecture, for example, and Moore's law, we were able to go from to get to petaflops to begin with, and now transition to exaflops. But we have no way of getting to this stage here. We need some of this stuff. We need neuromorphic type computing and even cytomorphic type computing. Okay, I'll skip this one and I'll skip the data storage. Let's talk about the world of startups. So in the world of startups, the big question is, what's more important, the jockey or the horse, the founder or the technology? And how do VCs evaluate startups? How do they look at the jockey? How do they look at the horse? So I can tell you what we look for in a founder. Right? We look for a founder to have clear and differentiated vision. It's very important. Clarity of vision. And clarity of vision comes through in the first 1 minute or less of discussion with a founder. Right? Strong belief and commitment to this vision. Is the founder personally inspired, and to what degree is the motivation and the commitment to see it through? Leadership and communication skills are essential, of course, because a founder is like nobody else really. A founder is taking an idea, building infrastructure, building a company around the idea, making it work in service of humanity, right? This is a big deal. Not everybody can do this. Not everybody has the energy, the vision, the leadership skills, the communication skills, all this put into a single person to build a successful startup. Right? Tireless, full of energy and enthusiasm, deeply understands the market dynamics. Flexible and dynamic. Sometimes I'll be sitting in a presentation by a founder, and there's slides, and I can ask, for example, the founder a question, and then the founder might say, "Oh, that's coming up later in the presentation." So the founder wants, a structured way to do the presentation, doesn't want to be interrupted with something he doesn't or she doesn't intend to say at that particular instance in time. Not a good sign. Not a good sign. You must be very flexible. So if you get a question, even though you're going to address it later, address it now. Address it now. This shows you are flexible. You can adapt. You can think outside the line. So your presentation can be disrupted, right? But you still can come back to your original point without hesitation. All right. Can and does listen. Very important. Nobody knows everything. Nobody knows everything, and so the ability to listen and learn is very important. Ability to recruit the best, and a lot of these are mutually dependent, right? So your ability to recruit has a lot to do with your communication skills. They have a lot to do with your leadership skills, and they have a lot to do to the degree that you can inspire other people. And finally, the network, significant network, that's important, but that can be built over time, right? So I put that last because sometimes when you're starting out, you have a great idea, you don't really have a network established yet, but that can be built over time. And make no mistake about it, building a startup takes over your life, completely takes over your life, all right? And sometimes founders initially are CEOs, right? They have a great idea, they have a great technical idea, right? And it's their idea, so they become CEO. But sometimes they're not built to be CEOs. Sometimes they're built to be idea people, idea people, technologist oriented. A CEO has that function, but has a lot of other different functions. And sometimes a founder is not a great CEO, right? So my advice to the founders out there, ask yourself, what do you do best? What do you do best? Are you a CEO best, or are you an idea person best? If you're an idea person best, your time should be spent on ideas, on developing the technology. Maybe you are the CEO initially, right? But after 1 year, 2 years, at some point, bring in a CEO that knows how to be a CEO, that can be a great CEO, that has the experience to be a great CEO. All right, how do we evaluate the horse, the technology, right? So first question is, what is the key innovation? What's the problem that you are trying to solve? And very importantly with that, we look at the technology roadmap. Now, some of the startups I meet don't even have a technology roadmap. They have a target roadmap in terms of business, how many billions of dollars they're going to have in revenue in 5 years, in 6 years. But some of them don't even have a technology roadmap. And technology roadmap is key to evaluating the technology, because technology roadmap tells me a number of things. First, tells me that you are thinking about sustaining the differentiation. So you may be differentiated today, but are you going to be differentiated in 5 years, right? So that's one. Two, technology roadmap tells me that you have vision in terms of where you're going to get to in 5 years. And I don't look for technology roadmap to be further than 5 years out. Right? I think in our line of work, 5 years is a long time already. So I don't look for a 10-year or a 15-year. That would be, I think, ridiculous. Nobody knows. But along with that is there are milestones when you develop a technology roadmap. What are the key challenges? Do you understand, you as a founder, you as a technologist, as a CTO, do you understand the challenges that you need to overcome to get to that milestone, right? And do you have the solution pathways identified, right? And it doesn't have to be a specific solution pathway, but a host of possible solution pathways to address these challenges, right? So, and if this technology roadmap is not documented, it's like strategy. If it's not documented, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have it, right? It's got to be documented, right? The third thing is, what's the competitive landscape? What does it look like? And that's key to understanding the degree to which your technology is differentiated. So what's the state of the competition, and how you're positioning your startup within this competitive landscape. Fourth, is your IP protected, right? Anytime you start a company, that means you have a new idea. So right off the bat, you have intellectual property. How are you protecting it? Now, sometimes you could decide, well, I'm going to protect it by not patenting it. So it's a trade secret, right? That's okay. That's okay. And if you go the IP route, are you protected the right way with your patents? Do you have a patent strategy? What does your patent strategy look like, and how would it evolve over time? Right? The fifth is sustainability, right? And that has to do with the technology roadmap that I talked about. It can have many elements, but basically it's the sustainability of the differentiation, right? Can you remain differentiated in this business? Can you reinvent yourself over time, right? Six is the organization and the team. So we look at that very carefully. Do you have some of the best minds in the world working on your team? And how are you organized to innovate? And finally, the strategic relationships and alliances you have in place. All right. How to win. I believe I have one more slide. No, two more slides. And then we'll open it up for questions or answers, unless you want to ask now, or you. Yervan, should I finish or?
You can finish this since it's only 2 slides. Let's finish it,
Okay.
and then
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
yes.
As I was
Good.
saying it, I thought, oh, what a dumb thing to say. I only have 2 slides left. Okay. So there are 1.3 million technology startup founders today, right? So how do you compete in this landscape? Now, I don't know how they came up with all these other numbers. 472 million entrepreneurs worldwide, 300 million startups annually, 100 million for business. But let's key in on the fourth one in the list, 1.35 million technology startups. Somebody trying to ask a question? 1.35 million technology startups today. 42% of startups go under because their product, their services is simply not needed. Simply not needed. And when most startups are initiated, are founded with personal funds, okay, you don't want to be part of that 42%, right? When you're putting your own funds and 77% of startups entrepreneurs use their own personal funds. So how do you compete in this? So how to win, right? So these are the pieces of how to win. First, maniacally focus on your users. Right? Some founders focus too much on the technology they have and not enough on the users. You need to put yourself in the place of the users, right? You need to feel what they feel. You need to think what they think. You need to see what your users see. And I believe if you get to that point, right, where you are your user, okay, then you can begin the journey towards success, right? But you have to focus on it and focus all your energy on your users. Right? Some people say your customers. So I'd rather say your users. Right? How does your product serve the user? Be the user, right? And that is the first step to improving the product that you have. Right. Secondly, ride the technology wave that you have in place. I mean, understand the megatrends of the time and ride these megatrends. Use the megatrends. So today, if you're developing a piece of hardware, right, very hard to compete. Very hard to compete. If you're developing a platform, that others can use, whether it's a platform for drug discovery or a platform for producing systems that use energy harvesting, right? Use a platform that would get you there sooner than developing a piece of hardware that you're gonna have to manufacture and sell. Right? So ride the wave, understand the business models that are most successful today. Develop your own optimal business model that maximizes your technology and maximizes, very importantly, the user experience. And you have to have a deep understanding of the competition. Right? You have to know the competition like you know yourself. Right? If you don't, you're not going to be in business for long. You're not going to be differentiated for long. You have to be your competition, and you have to understand your competition, and you have to live your competition. Fourth, understand the mentality of venture capital. Right? You have a startup, you're going to go and try to get funding. Right? You must understand how venture capital thinks. Right? And venture capital thinks slightly differently, whether you're in Europe or in the US, but there are some commonalities that all venture capitalists have. And they have two fears that they try to balance, right? One fear, the first fear is making an investment that becomes a losing investment, right? So the first fear is losing, right? Failing. So you invest in a company that goes under, right? That's a big fear, That's a big fear, because that's a failure point for you, and a major failure point for you, because it means you didn't do your due diligence properly. And the second fear is on the other side of that, the fear of missing out. So you meet the company, you evaluate. There are some risks there, and your fear is, well, if I don't invest, and this, becomes very, very successful and goes IPO, and uh, I will miss out on it. So every VC is trying to balance between those two fears, right? The fear of failure, that the company might fail, the startup might fail, and on the other side, the fear that the company might actually succeed and I'm not part of it. Right? So they're trying to balance between those two fears. So keep that in mind when you're presenting to companies. Companies are looking to VCs. VCs are looking at, what are the risks here? What are the risks? Does the founder understand the risks? And is the founder transparent enough, honest enough to outline these risks? Right? Because if the founder understands the risks, that means the founder understands the limits of the technology that he or she has, and the founder understands the state of the competition, right? And not just the state of the competition today, but what the competition is likely to do over the next few years. The fifth one, this is, I think, important advice I want to give. When you fundraise, that's all you're going to be doing, right? Fundraising takes over your activities. So if you're doing an A round, for example, you're going to be living that, right, and doing nothing else. So make sure you have separate people to do this, right? Or you have to be involved as a founder, of course, all right? But if everybody else is involved, if your technology team is heavily involved there, it's going to take them away for months from what they do and what they do best, because fundraising takes over your life. And when you're not fundraising, don't fundraise. So you do Series A, spend the time, fundraise, all right? Between Series A and Series B, don't fundraise, all right? If somebody is interested in funding between those two series, all right, then they have to just come and fund without going through, everything you usually go through when you're doing fundraising, right? So they have to be sure at that point without you having to convince them, right? These are between rounds, right? But when you do get to a specific round, it's going to take over your life for a few months, right? And finally, I asked the question, what's more important, the jockey or the horse? I think the jury is out on that. I personally think the horse is key, right? I think sometimes you can get the right jockey, but you can't always come up with the right innovation, right? So the jockey is not more important than the horse. And I will conclude with that and open it up for your questions. Thank you for listening.
Perfect. Rafi, thanks a lot. This was amazing. Your insight, your advice, your vision overall is huge. Let's see what questions do we have from the floor. I have a few in mind as well. Who would like to jump in? Yes, Sarkis, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rafi. Thanks for inspirational talk. At some point, it was mind-opening, inspiring. So thank you for that. I'm Sarkis. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Embrytech. And at Embrytech, we are building a platform which is using a smart insole to help people to manage their weight and lead healthy lives. My question is about about Mubadala. So, in which directions are you focused on mostly, and which stages?
Yeah. So we had our first fund established in 2017. And we're coming to the end of our Fund 1 in the US. We have established a fund in Europe. about a year and a half ago now, and we have one in the Middle East as well. The US fund, we're hoping to launch our fund 2 this quarter, sometime by the end of March. For our fund 1, our sweet spot was Series B, but we did fund earlier than that. Sometimes we do signal funding. So we look at the company. There's a lot of promise there, but there's also some questions left. But the promises can be huge. So we do signal type funding. For our second fund, I think we'll still be doing some of that, but we will be focused a little more on some of the later rounds. Higher than B, maybe C, maybe our sweet spot there. But we also expect to have a growth fund associated with our second fund. So we could start early with the company and grow with the company and maintain our support for the company as the company grows. And one thing about the Mubadala, we have a global footprint. We're about a $250 billion investment sovereign fund. We're in over 30 countries, over 50,000 employees. We're in every type of business you could think of. So when we invest in a company, we don't just invest and walk away. We help the company succeed. We even have a complete organization called Value Creation. And they're there to help our investments succeed, to help our companies succeed. So they connect them with the right companies. They help them improve their business. So to answer your question with just a few words, we can do signal type investments. We can do rounds, and we can even do. So what stage is your company at, Sarjis?
Sorry?
What stage is your company at?
We are just approaching seed. We are building hardware. So we had previous pre-seed round and now approaching to seed. We just launched.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. It's a very interesting company. You may want to look at it at some point.
Yeah. Send me a note.
They have data. They have.
What is the best way to contact you?
Just email.
I'll send the email.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Happy to follow up. Ben, good to see you again. Ben, you're on mute. You're talking, but you're on mute.
Now I think you can hear me. Yes, I get the permission to talk. That was good. Great singer, Rafic. Yeah. Yes, it's good to see you again. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I enjoyed a lot, learned a lot during that hour. So yeah, I'd like to get more detail in the future episodes, hopefully. One quick question for you. You mentioned something about the data and how important is the data and what it's going. So this is kind of on the AI side, machine learning side, which is related to that. Do you believe that winner takes all in this case? Like you mentioned about the Tesla, why Tesla is great and because they have the data. At some point, the rumor is that you can't catch up with these companies because they started early. They've been training their machines for a while. If you buy into winner takes all, then how would the mid-size or small-size companies can compete with the big guys? Or is there a way, or we just change it at this point?
Didn't Yervan tell you ahead of time you're not supposed to ask me difficult questions?
Okay.
No, but that's a great question.
On that one.
It's a great question. So the answer is partly yes. Those who have the data are the kings and the queens, no question about it. But if you have a new angle, and I can give you an example. If you have a new angle, then you could be in good big business, and that's what you have to focus on. is what kind of angle can I have in this space. So in healthcare, privacy of data is very important, right? And the US has rules and regulations and standards. Europe has, similar types. European Union has similar type of rules and regulations and standards. And if you are developing machine learning technology, all right, to look at certain patterns in patient data, for example, understanding X-ray images, all right, and what they tell you, all right. You want to be able to access as many as you can, right? But because of data privacy concerns, you can't access. So some healthcare community might have lots of data that you would like to access. So there's a company in Europe called Auken that said, okay, why don't I look into that, right? Well, let me see if there's a way that I can have different machine learning organizations actually learn from data that they don't have, right? So they looked around and they discovered that Google had just invented something called federated learning, right? And federated learning is a branch of machine learning where you can actually do some machine learning on data without actually accessing the data, right? Without actually seeing the data. So they built a very successful company around it. So the answer to the question is yes. I think he or she who has the most amount of data is king or queen. But I also believe that there's plenty of room for innovation. I also talked about in the talk data compression technology. I talked about security and the need to secure your data. So there's a lot of angles. There's a lot of angles for startups. But great question.
Differentiator is a key still. Looks like it's finding a way to how to be different and there's still room for that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting thing to not to own the data but to have access to the data. So that could be a very good value that you can bring. On the security side, Rafi, can you also tell us what innovative aspects of security are needed these days? Data without security doesn't make sense, of course.
On the security side, and I would invite you to take a look at the decadal plan. There's a whole chapter on
Yes.
security. Of course, this is extremely important. And one of the things that we mentioned in the decadal plan is how can we learn from our own body, the way our body secures itself. So if you have a foreign object enter your system, how does it detect it? How does it detect it? And what does it do to destroy it? In fact, okay, which is part of the adaptive immune system. So I feel that there's a lot to do there. I feel that this is a very ripe area for innovation, is learning from our immune system, our adaptive immune system, how to fight invaders. And there are also lots of startups that I see that are trying to address this question of not moving your data. Okay, so if you have data that you only move the encrypted, if you move it, you move the encrypted version, or you give access without actually transitioning your data. Okay,
Yes.
so methods of giving access without transitioning. And the third one I want to talk about, very important, very close to my heart, is homomorphic computing, homomorphic encryption and computing. Homomorphic means that you encrypt the data and you can do computation on the encrypted data without ever decrypting the data, right? And if you can do machine learning, on encrypted data without actually decrypting the data, you can be a big winner.
Yes, that makes great sense. Okay, this was excellent, Rafi. I'm sure we have many more questions. We'll continue doing that at the next stage. But for now, let's wrap up the session. Again, thank you so much for your vision, for this amazing advice, insights, and so on. So the Virtual Bridge Accelerator program benefits a lot from you. We have the recording of this session. They will be following up the ones who missed it, unfortunately, due to the transition that we did. But we'll provide the YouTube, and they may follow up with certain questions following that. Okay. So I thank you on behalf of HBU Silicon Valley, the Ministry of High-Tech Industry, which is a co-sponsor of this program with us, as well as the Armenian Virtual College, which is hosting and providing us the online services for our program. Thanks again to all of you for attending. Thanks so much. All the best.